His fingers trembled around the small stack of bills like they were a fuse he could not afford to light. The light over the desk threw a thin rectangle across the worn hotel ledger, picked out the edges of Jordan Brooks's name tag, the frayed cuff of his coat, the thin silver ring he never took off. Behind him, the lobby hummed with the late-night machinery of a place that never quite slept. The distant hiss of a coffee machine, the soft clack of heels moving past, a TV muted in the corner casting washed-out travel shows against the wall. Kevin snorted from the side station. Lily's laugh was sharp as a paper cut. "Of course the black guy plays the hero again," Kevin said, loud enough for the lobby tiles to swallow and send back. Jordan looked at the woman standing before him. She was small, the hoodie too large for the shoulders it drooped over, hair tangled where it escaped the hood. Her eyes were red-ringed and raw, not with makeup, but with exhaustion that had set into the bone. She kept folding and unfolding her hands like she was trying not to pull a thread in the air. "Please," she said. Her voice was thin and raw like a match burned down to the nub. I can cover the deposit tomorrow. I just need somewhere to sleep." It was the kind of request Jordan had learned to weigh with a ledger he could not show on paper. Empathy versus policy. Impulse versus consequences. The hotel's policy was a steel line. No exceptions after midnight. No credit without ID. No unofficial covers. He knew the list by heart. He'd learned it the hard way during his early shifts. Still, the hesitation in her hands, the way she moved as if the floor itself might judge her, sliced something sharp across his sternum. Kevin leaned forward, smirk in place. "You can't just pull someone's cover like they're a charity case, Jordan. We have rules." Lily added, "What if she disappears? What if she doesn't pay? What then? We get blamed." Jordan felt the watch on his wrist tick, a steady sound in a night full of small noises. He thought of the last time someone had slipped him a kindness, a stranger buying an extra sandwich for his little girl when the bills at home stacked like unwelcome guests. He thought of Maya, asleep on the narrow couch and murmuring about a house with golden windows she had drawn in crayon earlier that evening. He imagined those golden windows glowing in a house that might or might not exist.
"How much is it?" he asked. "50, she said. "I have 40. He shifted his weight. His wallet was thin. His pockets kept the shape of a man who paid rent and reheated dinners. He could count out the bills without looking. There was another round of laughter, half performance, half nervousness, from Kevin as he spooled into a story no one had asked for, the kind that made people relax by putting someone else on the wrong side of history. Jordan set the bills down, not loud, not apologetic.
The sound was small, but when his hand left the cash on the counter, it left something else. An economy of grace he could not afford and would not explain. She cried without shame. It was a soft sound, a compression of shoulders and relief. "Thank you," she said in the kind of quiet that comes from finding a breath you thought you'd lost. Kevin and Lily watched him like spectators at a match they expected to be entertaining. Mr. Harris, the assistant manager who preferred forms and memos to people, hovered near the doorway with policy on his tongue. "We'll need a note on this," he said, officious, as if compliance forms might close off the human leak he had just observed. Jordan signed the slip with the smallest of gestures, his name, his authorization. He wrote carefully, as if the curve of the J might hold the moment steady. As he handed the key card across to the woman, the light caught the edge and flashed. A sliver of gold on plastic, ordinary and ridiculous and suddenly weighty. He thought of Maya's drawing. A hotel with golden windows. He slid the key to her as though sliding a promise into place. She clutched it like a talisman. Her fingers were warm and quick. For a moment their hands touched, and in the contact, there was the clean, almost naive recognition that a small kindness could equal the difference between not sleeping and sleeping. No one in the lobby knew the complexity of his life, how many breakfasts he missed to keep the bills paid, how many overtime shifts he took to keep the rent from being a threat. No one knew the list of repairs he'd postponed to make sure Maya had shoes that fit. They saw the gesture in the simplest terms and assigned it a headline. Foolish, sentimental, risky. They did not see the quiet ledger inside him that counted compassion as necessary as rent. Later, when the woman left, hood pulled low and keycard tucked into her palm like contraband. Jordan watched the elevator doors close and thought about the thin line he'd crossed. Rules covered a purpose. Policies were the skin of companies that needed to keep themselves from bleeding. He had put his hand where the world told him not to, and it felt like both an error and a right. He pretended to be counting towels the rest of the night, absently replacing pens behind the counter. But his mind kept returning to the way her shoulders had relaxed when she saw the key. When his shift ended, he walked out into a city that smelled like rain and fast food grease. The streetlights threw long hands across the pavement. Jordan's breath made small clouds. The money in his wallet seemed like a past-tense decision. He would not say he regretted it. He would say he'd done what he thought was right for the moment. But the ledger was not a single line. He imagined the balance shifting. At home, the small apartment lived in a slow, industrious way. It had chosen to be modest and honest rather than pretending. Maya slept under a tangle of colorful sheets, a small mop of hair spilling over a pillow her drawings had touched like a promise. Jordan paused in the doorway and looked at the little figure. Her breathing was regular. A bedtime song hummed inside her even as she slept. He crept to her side and found, taped to the wall above the bed, the drawing she had made that afternoon. A boxy building with a dozen golden windows, a big red door, 2 stick figures in the doorway. The sky was a wash of orange. A label in crayon read, "Home." He placed the golden edge key card on the nightstand beside it. It caught the lamp's light at an angle that made it look like a coin from some storybook kingdom. "You did that tonight?" Maya asked, not opening her eyes fully, her question more habit than inquiry. "Yeah," Jordan said. He sat on the edge of the bed and tried to keep his voice steady. He could feel the weight of what he'd done in the small fold of his chest where worry rested. Bills waited on the kitchen counter like little white tombstones. He had stretched the month on a promise and a part-time overtime shift, and he had still opened the ledger to the left. Maya blinked and then pushed a tangled corner of hair out of her face. Was she nice? Yeah. Jordan smiled because he wanted her to believe in the world that made room for kindness. He told her a short version of the truth about the woman and the key, leaving out the names of people who had laughed or the worry that settled in his teeth afterward. "Maybe one day we'll have a house with golden windows," Maya whispered, her small voice full of infinite conviction. "We will," Jordan told her, the word both a comfort and an intention. He could hear his own pulse in his throat, an old nervousness that always came when he let hope ask for space in the margins. He would tell her stories about men who did small, brave things, who held on to decency the way other men clung to chance. He made himself a quick dinner, frozen rice warmed, an egg cracked on top because it felt like more even if it wasn't. The bills on the counter waited their turn. He considered them with a sort of exhausted tenderness, like a parent considering a scraped knee. These things hurt, but you tended them and they healed, or they learned to live with the scar. Sleep came in patches that night, the kind that left him with snippets of waking, the beep of a key card, the distant jangle of a vending machine, Maya's tiny hands in his. When his phone alarm started its soft insistence at an hour he could barely justify being awake for, he hit snooze with a thumb heavy as a gavel. Work might forgive a little lateness. Life did not. He was halfway between brushing his teeth and tying his shoes when the phone on his nightstand vibrated with the hotel's number. Mr. Harris's clipped voice on the other end said they needed him downstairs in 10 minutes. There was no inflection. It was the voice of someone speaking a line prepared for both bad news and procedural inconvenience. Jordan, dressed in a uniform that smelled faintly of detergent, shaved just enough to avoid looking unkempt, and tucked Maya's crayon drawing into his back pocket like a small private map. He left before she was fully awake, leaving a note on the table where she would find it. "Back soon. Breakfast in the oven. Love you." He kissed her forehead, and then the top of her head the way people sometimes kiss an idea of home. The elevator ride down was a short corridor between 2 worlds. In front of him, the mirrored doors threw back his reflection 10 times, thinning him into a series of smaller men. He thought of the deposit he'd authorized, the keycard on his nightstand, and the glare of Kevin's smirk. He felt the meetings like small earthquakes, rumbling before the tremor. The conference room felt like a courtroom in neutral carpet. A long table dominated the center of the space, 12 chairs like witnesses, and a screen at the far end waiting for footage. Mr. Harris stood with his hands folded, his face the shape of someone who had practiced calm in front of mirrors. Kevin and Lily were there, each adopting their performance. Indignation, irritation, the easy sarcasm of people who have not yet had to answer to anything larger than their own preferences. Mr. Harris took a breath as Jordan slid into a chair at the table. "Morning," Mr. Harris said. "This is a meeting to review last night's incident at the front desk. We have footage and statements." Jordan felt a heat prick at the base of his neck. Footage. Cameras watched the lobby as faithfully as a church watched its pews. He waited for the click of a remote, for the dull flicker of an image on the screen, certain that he would watch himself unfold the scene and be judged by the clarity of his motives. Before Mr. Harris could press the remote, the door opened. The woman from the lobby stepped inside, but she did not move as a guest. She walked as a person who owns decisions, not as someone who had been rescued. Jordan's breath hollowed out of him like someone had taken a breath in the same room. She wore a tailored coat that cut the air around her. Her hoodie was gone. Her hair was neat, not out of necessity but by choice. The light in the room hid her features, and there was a solidity to her that the hoodie had hidden. She looked around as if assessing a painting, eyes fast and precise, and then they lingered on Jordan. "Good morning," she said. Her voice carried the same softness as the night before, and yet carried an authority now, like smoke in the wind that had been trained into a proper line. Jordan realized the lobby woman and this woman were the same, but matching the same face with a title felt like mismatching clothing and name. She did not fit neatly into any category. People always assumed what they wanted to assume when they looked at someone like her in a hoodie, a story they could tuck behind the curtains of their nights. Here she stood, an unscripted contradiction. Mr. Harris stepped forward, name placard already arranged for the moment. "This is Amelia White. She's with White Group Holdings. She's the new CEO overseeing the property." The air in the conference room shifted. It was a slow movement like a curtain being drawn. Kevin's smirk faltered. Lily's jaw did something small and human, like a hinge catching. Jordan watched Amelia as she let the title sit in the room. She did not clutch it as something to be hoarded, but held it like a tool. Amelia's gaze ran the table once more, fast and even, then settled on the screen as Mr. Harris opened the footage. The lobby blinked onto the wall, an angle from above, the cameras unblinking. It captured the small stage Jordan had stood on, the woman's hoodie trailing, Kevin leaning in with a laugh that looked, when slowed and replayed, like an echo larger than its origin. The sound of Kevin's voice was thin in the room, the phrase unmistakable. The camera held on Jordan's hand as it moved the euros of his empathy across the counter. He heard, as if from outside himself, the small clink of the cash being set down. Maya's drawing was not here, nor the pile of unpaid bills, but the image on the screen had the same power to tell a story. "Why did you do it?" Mr. Harris asked, his tone benign and brittle. The question was a filing cabinet opened for a reason. It needed both a fact and an explanation. Jordan could have answered in any number of ways. He could have spoken about the sandwich a stranger bought for his daughter years ago, about the way kindness had once been loaned to him and had kept him afloat. He could have spoken about the math of living on overtime and credit cards, about rents and the landlord's patience. Instead, he said simply, because she needed a place to sleep, because it felt like the right thing. The room seemed to weigh the sentence in small pieces. Kevin and Lily shifted as if they were adjusting their preconceptions, like lens adjustments meant to bring them back to focus. Amelia watched him with an angle that suggested she was logging information in a file none of the others had access to. There was no rush to condemnation in her face. There was a clear scanning. Fact, behavior, context. "You broke policy," Mr. Harris said finally. "I did," Jordan said. He did not apologize for the act so much as own the complexity of it. He felt something tight in his chest, and kept his eyes on Amelia. He could feel the ledger balancing, and the world asking if he would pay the price. Amelia did not speak immediately. She watched the footage again, this time pausing on the small details. Jordan's hand, the woman's crumpled smile, Kevin's laugh. When she spoke, it was not to offer a verdict, but to ask a new kind of question, one that considered consequence. "Do you know who she is?" she asked Jordan. He shook his head. He had not asked. The thing about small kindnesses is that the giver rarely expects a ledger of praise in return. He had simply acted. Amelia leaned forward, fingers steepled. "She is me," she said. The words landed in the room like a stone thrown into a quiet pond. Jordan's mind tried to lay them next to the images he had just watched. Woman in hoodie, woman given a key card, woman walking into a conference room. It was a puzzle that shifted when a piece was flipped. Amelia's presence now rearranged the morning's priorities. Her title sat in the space with an authority that demanded that the rest of the room adjust its posture. Jordan felt his mouth go dry. Images flashed. A handover of a key card, the slight bow of a person relieved of fear, and then a new image. The same person setting a place on this very table. For all the loudness of Kevin's sarcasm, for all the rules Mr. Harris loved to wave like banners, something like a new scale had been placed where judgment would be weighed. There was a pause. Kevin opened his mouth and closed it again. Lily's eyes had the flash of someone trying to remember a script that had been changed without their permission. Mr. Harris's face was a study in managerial discomfort, paperwork and policy, the things that grew thin in the face of human complexity. Amelia let the silence stretch, measured and purposeful. She did not smile. She did not need to. When she finally spoke again, the room leaned in as if an unseen current pulled them. "You came to the lobby last night," she said, addressing Jordan directly. "I needed a room. I came without a title. I came because—" She paused, choosing. "I wanted to see how people here would treat someone who had no status in this building. I wanted to know who looked and who saw." Jordan's heart was a drumbeat now, the tempo of someone waiting for the verdict of a thing that might not be labeled as mercy or punishment. He kept his hands folded in his lap. In the image of the lobby played on the screen, his hand still rested on the cash he had given. Amelia's eyes met Jordan's, steady and clear. "You broke policy," she said, "but you did it in a way that honored the dignity of the person standing before you. You didn't humiliate. You didn't lecture. You gave what you had." There was weight in her observation, an acknowledgement that business could measure and still miss. Around the table, people shifted as if hearing something unexpected. The implication that policy was not the only tool by which an institution kept itself whole. Kevin blinked, his mouth forming shapes that tried to become a retort. Lily's hand found the edge of the table like a ledger trying to anchor itself. Amelia's gaze slid to them. "There are other things we will discuss," she said softly, not yet moving toward a final judgment. Her voice hinted at a patience that could be a blade. "But first I want to hear from Jordan. Tell me why dignity mattered to you last night." Jordan felt the room narrow to the space between his ribs and the words rising up. He could speak about policy, about fear, about being a father. He could tell her that being a single parent had taught him that the world was not kind enough, and that sometimes you had to make a choice between following a rule and saving a life for a few hours. He could say those things here, in a room of paperwork and boss chairs. He felt Maya's drawing in his back pocket, the night's key card on his nightstand, the quiet courage that lives in small hands. He opened his mouth to answer, to put the ledger into words, when the door at the end of the room clicked softly, and the hallway light slid through like a new breath. The motion of the room pulled his answer half-formed back, like a tide reclaiming something it had loaned. For a second, the future and the past hummed together. Maya asleep at home, the woman in the hoodie out on a bitter night, Kevin's small cruelty, and Jordan felt the world tilt, like someone had rearranged the furniture of his life without telling him. He sat up straighter, his pulse a promise and a question. Amelia's hand was resting on the arm of her chair. She regarded him not with pity, not with a show of power, but as someone who had watched a system and decided to intervene. The air around her did not carry the tinsel of theatrics. It held the cool precision of someone whose authority could be used to correct rather than to reward. Outside, somewhere on the street, a bus sighed and started on its route. Inside, the TV in the corner of the lobby had once shown travel documentaries. Now the room was full of a different kind of travel, one where people moved from assumptions into understanding with nothing more than a key card and a choice. Jordan's tongue felt thick and honest in his mouth. He thought of Maya's golden windows again, the way she had drawn them as if they existed in absolute terms already. He realized then that some choices are small enough to be invisible and large enough to rearrange the day that follows. The screen still showed the lobby, still held the evidence of what happened. Amelia sat back and folded her hands like someone who had finished measuring. She did not yet speak the conclusions she held. The room waited like an audience that had not been given its cue. Jordan realized, with an odd both sweet and bitter clarity, that breaking a rule had consequences that might not all be his to bear. He had laid down bills in faith that a person would sleep. He had set in motion a set of events he could not have imagined the night before. A camera, a manager's report, the slow administrative machinery that shifted priorities when an executive decided to look. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A message from Maya. "Don't forget story." He smiled, the edges of his mouth catching like a coin in a slot. He tucked his hands under the table and felt the tiny dent of the golden edge keycard he had left in his room. It was a small thing, an emblem of a single night's decision, and yet it had become something else in the crisp morning, the hinge on which a conversation about dignity and policy now turned. Amelia leaned forward, and before Mr. Harris could reach for the legal language that would turn this into a checklist, she said, "We will address the behavior you witnessed here, but I need to understand the spirit behind it. Jordan, tell me now, why did you choose the person over the policy?" His answer would not only be his to give, it might redefine the expectations in a building that kept its rules like fences. He took a breath, tasting the air that smelled faintly of disinfectant and new beginnings, and began to speak. He let the breath out slow and steady, the kind that comes when waiting is traded for speech. The words came not as a speech, but as the narrowing of a life into a single line. "I'm a father," Jordan said. "I work nights so Maya can go to school during the day. There's rent at the end of every month, a fridge that hums like it's doing us a favor, and a list of things that can't be ignored. Sometimes the math says no, and sometimes your hands have to say yes anyway. I didn't sign anything heroic last night. I just saw someone who was scared and did what I could. My daughter drew a hotel with golden windows today. I'd like her to keep believing in rooms that are given, not earned by the size of your wallet." He heard his voice, and recognized the tremor that came from carrying too many small fears at once. He could have left out the part about Maya, the way mentioning her might thin him or make him sound sentimental. He didn't. The drawing in his pocket felt like a small anchor. Saying her name made his reason visible in a room that preferred paperwork. Amelia watched him in a way that felt like measurement, not judgment. She didn't fold her hands as someone scoring mercy. Her face stayed calm, but there was a change in the atmosphere, an edge of something corporate learning humility. "Thank you," she said when he paused. "I asked you because I wanted to see who looked and who saw. I asked because leaders need a reliable reading of how policy plays out at the edges." Her words were not praise so much as a field report. Kevin shifted in his seat, the chair squeaking like someone trying to correct their posture. Lily's eyes went to the screen and then to her hands. Mr. Harris cleared his throat. His control had been a map of procedure, and now the map was smudged. "Jordan," Amelia went on, "I could punish rule-breaking. I could ask for resignations, forms, long memos about precedent. But what I'm more interested in is the culture those forms either protect or hide. We have cameras that record action, but not intention. We have policies that protect assets but sometimes forget people. I want both fixed." She turned to Mr. Harris. "We will start with looking at how policies are applied at night. We will ask why the discretion of an employee meant embarrassment for a guest. We will create an emergency fund for situations like this. Small, audited, accessible. And we will bring training on dignity and bias to this property next week." The list was surgical in its calmness. It named systems, not scapegoats. Mr. Harris, who had always believed paperwork solved problems, tried to find his voice behind a stack of protocols. He offered a defensive explanation about liability and company policy. Amelia listened, then tapped the table. "We will also be reviewing staff conduct," she said quietly. Professionalism includes the way we talk about people when they are most vulnerable. Kevin's face went a quiet color. Lily's fingers tightened on the table edge. You will be suspended pending review, Amelia said to both of them, and we will bring human resources in to speak to bias and customer care. If the review shows systemic issues in behavior, her eyes settled on Mr. Harris, those will be addressed in accordance with company standards. It was a sentence that promised consequence without theatrics. It did not gloat. It did not make Kevin look like a villain in a cartoon. It simply gave the room a reality they had been avoiding, that words had costs, and that those who wielded policy had responsibility beyond the ink. Kevin stammered protest, about precedent, about fairness. Lily tried the weary defense of, we were doing our jobs. Amelia allowed their words to finish, and then addressed the board-like silence they had created. I observed what I needed to observe, she said. I will not tolerate mockery that violates our standards. We will hold people accountable, but we will also teach. Jordan felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Relief because the moment he'd frozen over had not become a place to be consumed. Fear because he'd still broken a rule, and rules in companies were not moral propositions to be won or lost on feeling alone. He had acted on a private ledger, love and need, and a willingness to carry temporary risk. He watched Amelia weigh the difference between mercy and message, and felt oddly grateful that she was choosing infrastructure over spectacle. You did break policy, she said, turning to him now, and we will need to address that. But rule-breaking that preserves dignity is not the same as negligence, which is to say, you showed leadership. How would you have done it differently if you had to do it again with the system's support? It was an invitation and a test. Jordan could have replied with rhetoric. Instead, he thought about the slack places in the night, a procedure that choked on human need, a manager who traded eye contact for forms, the way cameras watched, but missed the context that made a person seem like a threat. You could give me a line of authorization, he said. Someone on the floor who can say this is an emergency and who won't make the guest feel like charity. A fund where the money is tracked, so it's not coming out of someone's pocket. Training, short, clear, so people know how to treat someone who's scared. And a real consequence for staff who mock a guest. I don't want bonus points. I want predictable tools. Amelia's face changed then into something small and sharp, like a lock finding its key. She nodded, pleased. That's exactly the kind of practical thinking I want, she said. She leaned forward in a way that made the space feel smaller and more immediate. We're going to do something more useful than say sorry on a report. We're going to build a structure so the next time someone like you faces that choice, the choice isn't between a rule book and a conscience. It's between policy carrying dignity and policy hiding from it. Mr. Harris made a crisp, wet sound by way of agreement. Kevin and Lily traded glances. Both were very likely already cataloging reasons to be angry, or afraid, or both. Amelia turned to Jordan again. Would you be willing to help shape that? We're going to pilot the program here. We need people who understand the night, who know the guests and the gaps. I can put you in a meeting with HR and operations if you'll come. Jordan's ribs felt like they were being unlatched. An offer sat in the air that was not a salary lottery ticket. It was a call to stewardship, a seat at a table to help change how the hotel handled the edges of need. He could decline and stay behind the desk, his moral ledger private. He could accept and be put more squarely in the light with responsibilities that would pull him out of the small safety of his nights. I don't know what to say, he admitted. The words were honest. He thought of Maya's drawing, the small night he had paid for. He thought of bills that still needed attention. Being visible could be dangerous. Being visible could be useful. You can say no, Amelia allowed, not begging, just laying out the plain fact. I'm not asking you to be a public example. I'm asking you to help design something that protects people and staff, so choices like last night don't fall entirely on the courage of one person. He pictured the key card on his nightstand, the sliver of gold flashing like a coin. He pictured Maya's face when he told her what had happened, her unquestioning faith in good rooms and good people. He thought of the moment of contact with the woman's hand, warm, clutching the plastic as if accepting more than a bed. "All right," he said finally. "I'll come to the meeting." Amelia allowed a small, almost private smile. "Good. Also," she added, "I want to be clear about one more thing. The people who mocked the guest, who created a culture that allows mockery, will face the consequences of their actions. We will be fair, and we will be firm. That is accountability, not vengeance." Kevin's mouth made a hard line at that. Lily's shoulders tightened and then dropped, as if she were bracing for a gust. The meeting shifted then into a set of procedural steps. HR would review, security footage would be logged, a temporary suspension would be issued to the employees pending investigation. Amelia's language made the consequences sound inevitable, like a company doing what it had promised in glossy pamphlets, but had often let slide. Jordan listened to the mechanics and realized he could choose to be part of the mechanism, to help the hotel act on the better language it had adopted. When the meeting broke, people left with different kinds of steps to take. Kevin and Lily walked out with the brittle, embarrassed gait of people who had been called to the mat. Mr. Harris stayed behind with Amelia and Jordan while the room emptied. He tried, in his cramped managerial way, to defend the letter of the policy. "We can't just create exceptions," he said. "There's precedent, liability. The guest could have been—" "You could have told the guest about a local shelter," Amelia interrupted before he could finish. "You could have offered other options, but you chose to laugh instead. That is a failure of leadership, not a failure of policy." Mr. Harris's face folded. He knew the forms. He also knew the moment when the forms failed to cover the need. He swallowed and nodded. "We'll set up the training," he said, quieter now. "We'll draft the emergency fund protocol." Amelia put a hand on Jordan's shoulder, a soft contact that felt like passing a baton. "You'll join the committee," she said. "And Jordan, would you accept a promotion to front desk supervisor? Not because of what happened, but because of how you think. Leadership isn't titles, it's decisions. I'd like you in a role where you can help shape how this team responds to humans at night." The offer landed differently than it might have months ago, when Jordan would have thought a supervisor's hours would mean less time with Maya, or more stress. But the role came with something else. Agency. It would mean slightly better pay, the ability to shift schedules to better nights for a parent, and a voice when operations made rules. It was not a golden ticket. It was a practical way to move the culture. Jordan's immediate instinct was to say no, to protect the small, steady life he had built from the turbulence of visibility. But the image of Maya's drawing as something that could be mirrored in real life tugged. He thought of the nights he'd worked double shifts so she could have music lessons, the nights he'd chosen kindness and been almost ruined by anxiety. A chance to make the structure better for others felt like a sensible risk. "What about my hours?" he asked. "Maya, school. We'll work the hours," Amelia said. "You'll be consulted. We don't want to lose the people who know the heart of the work. We want to support them." He thought of the small coin of his life now being exchanged for a role where he could sign off on the emergency fund, where he could make it normal for staff to treat frightened guests like people. He saw, briefly and vividly, Maya growing up in a world where adults knew how to be kind without being heroic about it. "All right," he said. "I'll take it." There was a softness to Amelia's approval that felt more like respect than pity. She walked him to Mr. Harris's desk, and they began to outline the practical steps: job description, schedule changes, training modules. The conversation slid into the mechanics of human work, the language HR liked, the audit trail finance required. Jordan found himself filling the room with the plain facts of night shifts, of guest turnover at strange hours, of the small courage required to do anything at 2 a.m. He spoke in the concrete terms of lived experience, and Amelia listened. When he left the conference room, the lobby felt like the same space lit differently. The cameras blinked in their housings. The desk still smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant. Kevin and Lily were being approached by HR, their faces a mixture of indignation and dawning comprehension on different axes. The woman, Amelia in civilian clothes the night before, Amelia in a crisp coat this morning, moved through the lobby with an efficiency that suggested she had already begun taking notes. Jordan returned to a shift that felt both the same and not. The night's rhythm resumed, but the air had a different quality. People who had once laughed a little too loudly now treated the corner where the desk sat with a more careful ease. Word moves fast in a small building. People noticed when the tone at the top changed. That afternoon there was a call with HR and a meeting set for the next week to draft the emergency fund protocol. Jordan's supervisor title was made preliminary, pending paperwork, but the more important thing was that he was asked to be at the table when the policies were rewritten. He read the draft Amelia sent, short, clear, less about moralizing and more about process. It allowed for discretion. It allowed for dignity. The first week of the new program was modest: an announcement to staff, a short training on treating guests without judgment, the opening of the emergency fund with a small initial allocation. It wasn't a banquet. It was a seed. Jordan sat through the training and watched Kevin and Lily there, shoulders tight, not yet reconciled to the idea that what they had said had consequences. HR spoke about bias in measured terms, microaggressions, the impact of words, role-playing about de-escalation. It was, in its way, the institutional equivalent of a parent trying to teach a child to recognize when they're hurting someone else. When the first small claim was made on the emergency fund, a guest whose ID had been stolen and who needed a deposit for one night, Jordan reached into the fund, filled out the form, and felt something in his chest loosen. The paperwork made the help accountable, visible, and without shame. Later that week he caught a manager handing a guest a printed list of shelters with the same human tone he'd wished for. The list included not just addresses but hours and phone numbers, and a note about hot meals. It was small. It was important. There were awkward moments. Kevin remained sullen for weeks. Lily gave a quiet apology to a guest she had snapped at. It was brief, but the guest smiled, and the hotel's little ecosystem resumed its work. Mr. Harris, with his love of forms, learned to put a human note on incident reports. He found, to his surprise, that the neatness of a note that began with "guest appeared frightened" rather than "guest non-compliant" did not ruin his paperwork. It made it more useful. Jordan's new role came with extra hours and a small raise. It also came with more responsibility on his shoulders: training shifts, being a point person for late-night emergencies, the need to mediate staff conflict. At home, it meant he could schedule his hours so that he wouldn't miss Maya's school performances, and that he could pick her up sometimes, instead of sending her with a neighbor. Money didn't vanish from the problems he lived with, but the margin grew slightly. He bought Maya a small tin of crayons to replace the broken ones. She noticed. One evening, after a long set of schedule changes and a meeting with HR about bias training modules, Jordan came home with his supervisor badge tucked in his pocket like a new, heavy coin. Maya greeted him at the door with a plate of macaroni she had made and a crayon drawing that filled an entire sheet. A building with many golden windows, a big red door, 2 stick figures, and another figure beside them labeled AM in a child's careful scrawl. "Who's AM?" Jordan asked as he rinsed his plate. "She's the lady who gave you the key," Maya said, matter of fact. "She's nice." Jordan felt the world shift in small, domestic increments. He sat with Maya on the floor and put the drawing up on the wall in a place of honor. He reached into his pocket and set the golden edge key card on the nightstand under the drawing, and then propped his new staff badge beside it. The trio looked like a mini museum of what had happened, small artifacts of a night, and the consequences that followed. "Do you think she'll come by again?" Maya asked as she tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "I don't know," Jordan said. He meant it. Amelia was a busy person. He didn't expect recurring encounters with the CEO of a holding company. But he also knew that real change was less about repeat visits and more about what the visit set in motion. After a month, there was a short ceremony of sorts in the staff room. A printed memo from Amelia thanking the team for their participation in the pilot program and announcing the permanent inclusion of dignity training and onboarding. Mr. Harris read it aloud in an unexpectedly formal manner. Kevin was not there. He had elected to transfer to another property. Lily remained but kept a quieter profile, and in time treated guests with more caution. The tone at the desk had shifted, not entirely, but enough that Jordan's nights felt less like balancing beams and more like work with tools. Amelia visited once more, quietly, while Jordan was at the desk. She didn't make a scene. She sat in the corner of the lobby and watched, an executive auditing life at ground level, making notes for herself. When she walked up to the desk, Jordan stood and she offered him a small nod. "You did well," she said simply. "Thank you," he replied, "for stepping in." "For stepping up," she corrected, a small smile. "And for staying. People move around, leadership stays." She tapped a printout she had in her hand. "The committee's work will be rolled out across 3 more properties. You'll be listed as a contributor. We'll also set up a small recognition program, non-financial, to highlight staff who preserve dignity under pressure." Jordan felt the recognition as an odd warmth that was not about money, but about being seen. He thought of the nights he had almost chosen shame's small comfort over action's risk. He thought of the golden windows taped above Maya's bed. He put his hand on the keycard without saying anything. "Does Maya still draw?" Amelia asked, surprising him with a question that was more human than corporate. "All the time," Jordan said. "She once drew a house that had a door labeled open in crayon." Amelia's smile widened in a way that made her face softer. "Good," she said. "We need more people who draw doors that say open." Weeks turned into months, and the emergency fund, small and audited, was used several times. Each use came with a note and a brief follow-up. Guest name, circumstance, assistance given, outcome. The documentation made the help accountable and prevented the fund from becoming a slush pool for lucky cases. Training sessions were practical, 2 hours long and scenario-based, and they included role-playing about de-escalation and scripts for speaking to vulnerable guests without talk that shamed. Jordan kept a small stack of forms in his desk drawer, a ledger of the nights he'd asked the company to shoulder part of the risk. Each item on the list was a story, not a headline. A man who'd lost his wallet and needed the bus fare home. A woman escaping a violent situation and needing an ID hold. The forms didn't fix homelessness. They didn't pretend to. They were small repairs, stitches that acknowledged a problem society had not solved. In time, the Golden Edge keycard from that night was reprinted as a commemorative card. Jordan requested one and framed it behind glass at home. It was not ostentatious. It hung beside Maya's drawing and his simple staff badge. It became a ritual object for him, a reminder that small acts could have larger implications, and that the right kind of power could be used to change routine behavior. One evening, Amelia sent a note asking Jordan and Maya to come by for a short visit. It was informal, nothing staged. She wanted to thank staff in person for participating in the pilot, and she had requested Jordan specifically because of his role. Maya arrived in a dress she had picked herself and clutched a new crayon drawing. Jordan felt a lightness he hadn't had in a long time. The hotel's canopy glowed in the dusk like a promise kept. When they walked in, Amelia met them by the desk. She knelt in a way that made it easy for Maya to talk to her, treating her like someone with something to give, not someone to be consoled. "Hi," Maya said, holding out her picture. "This is me and Daddy in AM's building. We drew you a golden window." Amelia took the drawing with a gentle seriousness. "Thank you, Maya. It's perfect." They talked for a few minutes about the program. Amelia asked Maya if she liked the golden windows. Maya declared a preference for red doors. And then Amelia reached into her bag and pulled out a small framed key card. "It's for you," she told Jordan. "A little reminder, not a reward. Just an acknowledgement. Keep it where you can see it." Jordan accepted it with the modesty of someone who did not want to be the center of attention, but found himself there anyway. He placed it, later that night, above Maya's bed, alongside the drawing. The 3 objects, badge, key, crayon picture, hung like a triad of small certainties. The last scene in Jordan's month of changes was not dramatic. It was a long night where a man who had been homeless for years came through the doors with a case and a careful smile. Jordan spoke to him with the same quiet directness he had learned to use with everyone now. "How can we help? What do you need? Here are options." The man accepted a cheap room for the night, paid a small portion of the deposit from cash, and Jordan filed the form to use the emergency fund for the rest. The man slept that night without the humiliation he might have once felt. When the man left in the morning, he stopped at the desk, handed Jordan a slip of paper and said, "Thank you. See you around." It was not a monumental exchange. It was human. At home later that day, Jordan found Maya coloring and asked her to tell the story she had tucked into crayon. She spoke of AM as if Amelia were a superhero who also balanced spreadsheets. Jordan listened, heart light, and then he told her the truth, a version simple enough for a child and complex enough to be honest. He told her that people with power could make choices that fix the systems, not just patch the people who smelled like trouble. He told her he'd been offered more responsibility, and that he'd accepted because it might make things better for other people like the woman in the hoodie. Maya nodded, convinced in the way children are convinced of simple moral arcs. She colored the red door carefully and then stuck the drawing on the wall. Jordan tucked the framed keycard in a spot where it caught the lamplight and reflected like a small promise. The hotel at night looked different to him now. The windows he once saw as faceless were, in fact, 1,000 small lives. People coming and going, routines and emergencies, all passing through the same architecture. He'd learned that one small act did not solve everything. It also did not leave everything the same. Leadership, Jordan had discovered, often meant choosing to make the rules better, and then stepping back so others could follow them. It meant being visible in ways that were useful rather than performative. It meant his nights were sometimes longer, but his margin wider. A slightly safer life for him and a life where Maya could imagine golden windows without fear that they were fairy tales. Months later, a framed memo in the staff room announced that the pilot program had been rolled out to multiple properties. There were minor awards, procedural updates, and the odd staff meeting where people who had once mocked now listened. Kevin's absence became a quiet fact, and Lily's new caution became a small redemption. The emergency fund remained small and carefully audited. Jordan's name appeared on a company memo as a contributor to the Dignity Initiative. It wasn't a headline. It was a utilities bill of change, steady and institutional. One night after a long shift, Jordan sat at the edge of Maya's bed and told her a story he made up. Not about a man who became a king, but about a man who watched over small doors and kept them open. Maya listened, eyelids heavy, and then she said without a trace of doubt, "Daddy, one day we'll live in a house with all the golden windows." "We will," he answered. He believed it in a practical, patient way. Belief for him had become work. It had feet and schedules and forms. It also had the quiet, steady conviction of a man who refused to let every small need be invisible. Outside the window, the hotel's windows were a constellation of lights, some dim, some bright. Inside, the framed keycard reflected a sliver of lamp glow. Jordan looked at it and thought of two hands touching over a piece of plastic, of a child's drawing taped to a wall, of a CEO who had chosen to listen. The world had not cured homelessness. It had not magically resolved every problem, but in a small building at the edge of a city, systems had shifted enough that a frightened woman had a place to sleep that night, that a staff member had been offered a role to shape policy, and that a child's drawing had become less fantasy and more blueprint. He turned off the lamp and leaned over to kiss Maya's forehead. She slept soon after, a small, steady presence. Jordan lay awake a while longer, thinking of the ledger inside him, now balanced by other hands and other systems. He felt the tired satisfaction that comes from doing something necessary and seeing the change begin to ripple outward. If someone had asked him in the lobby that night whether one small act could matter, he would have shrugged and said something practical. Now he saw it differently. Small acts did not guarantee fortune. They did not cancel the slow grind of bills and nights. But they could be the hinge on which an institution chose to open or not. They could, with the right authority watching, become an argument for policy that served people and protected staff. That, Jordan thought as he finally closed his eyes, was a kind of miracle. Not the miraculous kind, but a practical, human one. An institution trained to see. A leader who used power to fix systems. A little girl whose crayon windows might one day be real. If this story reached you, consider what small tangible thing you might do to preserve someone's dignity tonight. A brief call to a shelter, a donation of toiletries, a respectful conversation. Those small acts can shift a life in quiet, measurable ways. If this moved you, like and subscribe for more stories that hold people and systems up for honest view. And if you're able, consider supporting a local shelter or charity that helps people with dignity. Small help, well delivered, makes a real difference.